Demonical man. The fundamental feature of Superman is power. The idea of power is very often connected with the idea of demonism, and then appears demonical man. Many people have been enthusiastic about demonism, but nevertheless the idea is utterly false, and in its essence not of a very high order. As a matter of fact, the beautiful demonism we know is one of the pseudo-ideas by which people live. We do not know and do not want to know the real demonism, such as it must be according to the correct meaning of the idea. All evil is very small and very vulgar. There can be no strong and great evil, for evil always consists of the transforming of something great into something small. But how can people reconcile themselves to such an idea? They must necessarily have great evil. Evil is one of the ideas that exist in the minds of men in falsified form, in the form of their own pseudo-imagery. Our whole life is surrounded by such pseudo-images. We have a pseudo-Christ, a pseudo-religion, a pseudo-civilization, pseudo-art, pseudo-sciences, a pseudo-philosophy, and so on. Generally speaking, however, there can be two kinds of falsification. One, the more usual, where a substitute is given in place of the real thing, instead of bread, a stone, and instead of fish, a serpent. The other, a little more complex, when base truth is transformed into an exalting lie. Reference the writings of Alexander Pushkin. This occurs when an idea or a phenomenon, constant and common in our life, small and insignificant in its nature, is painted over and decorated with such zeal that at last people begin to see in it a certain disturbing beauty, and some features which invite imitation. A very beautiful sad demon, spirit of exile, is created precisely through such a falsification of the clear and simple idea of the devil. Lermontov's demon or Milton's Satan is a pseudo-devil. The idea of the devil, the slanderer, the spirit of evil and lies, is intelligible and necessary in the dualistic philosophy of the world. But then the devil has no attractive features, whereas the demon or Satan possesses many beautiful and positive qualities. Power, intelligence, contempt of everything small and vulgar, none of which, however, are features of the devil. The demon or Satan is an embellished, falsified devil. The real devil is, on the contrary, the falsification of everything brilliant and strong. He is counterfeit, plagiarism, vilification, vulgarization, the street or the gutter. In his book on Dostoevsky, Artemy Valinsky drew particular attention to the way in which Dostoevsky depicted the devil in The Brothers Karamazov. The devil whom Ivan Karamazov sees is a parasite in checkered trousers who suffers from rheumatism and has lately had himself vaccinated against smallpox. The devil is vulgarity and triviality embodied. Everything he says is mean and vile. It is scandal, filthy insinuation, the desire to play upon the most repulsive sides of human nature. The whole sordidness of life spoke with Ivan Karamazov in the person of the devil. We are, however, inclined to forget the real nature of the devil and are more willing to believe the poets who embellish him and make an operatic demon out of him. The same demoniacal traits are ascribed to Superman. But it is enough to look at them more closely to see that they are nothing more than pure falsification and deceit, taking us far from the idea and leading into another blind alley. Speaking generally, in order to understand the idea of Superman, it is useful to have in mind everything opposed to the idea. From this point of view, it is interesting to note that aside from a devil in checkered trousers who has had himself vaccinated, there is another well-known type uniting in itself all in man that is opposed to the Superman. Such is the Roman procurator of Judea in the time of Jesus, Pontius Pilate. The role of Pilate in the gospel tragedy is characteristic and significant, and if it were a conscious role it would be one of the most difficult. But it is strange that perhaps of all the roles of the gospel drama, the role of Pilate needs least of all to be a conscious one. Pilate could not make a mistake, could not act in this way or in that way, and therefore he was taken in his natural state as a part of the surroundings and conditions. Just as were the people who gathered in Jerusalem for the Passover and the crowd who shouted, "Crucify him, crucify him." The role of Pilate is identical with the roles of the Pilates in life generally. It is insufficient to say that Pilate tried Jesus, wanted to free him and then finally executed him. This does not determine the essence of his nature. That this man was not a pretender, not an impostor who called himself the king of Judea but simply a philosopher, as he could define Jesus to himself. This philosopher aroused his sympathy, even his compassion. The Jews clamoring for the blood of an innocent man was repellent to him. He tried to help Jesus. But it was too much for him to fight for Jesus in earnest and incur unpleasantness, so after a short hesitation Pilate delivered him up to the Jews. It may have been in his mind that he was serving Rome and in this particular case was safeguarding the peace of its rulers, maintaining order and quiet among the subject people, averting the cause of possible unrest, even sacrificing an innocent man for it. It was done in the name of politics, in the name of Rome, and the responsibility seemed to fall on Rome. Certainly Pilate could not have known that the days of Rome itself were already numbered and that he himself was creating one of the forces that were to destroy Rome. But the thinking of Pilate's never goes as far as that. Furthermore, Pilate with regard to his own actions had a very convenient philosophy. Everything is relative, everything is a question of point of view, nothing is of any particular value. It was a practical application of the principle of relativity. On the whole, Pilate is a very modern man. With such a philosophy it is easy to find the way amidst the difficulties of life. Jesus even helped him when he said, "For this cause came I into the world that I should bear witness unto the truth." "What is truth?" ironically answered Pilate. This immediately put him into his accustomed way of thinking and acting. Reminded him who and where he was, showed him how he should look at things. Pilate's essential feature is that he sees the truth but does not wish to follow it. In order to avoid following the truth which he sees, he has to create for himself a special skeptical and mocking attitude towards the very idea of truth and towards the adherents of the idea. In his own heart he is no longer able to regard them as criminals. He has outgrown this. But he must cultivate in himself a certain slightly ironical attitude towards them, which will allow him to sacrifice them when it is necessary. Pilate went so far that he even tried to set Jesus free, but of course he would not have allowed himself to do anything that could compromise him. This would have made him ridiculous in his own eyes. When his attempts failed, as possibly he could foresee, he came out to the people and washed his hands, showing by this that he disclaimed responsibility. The whole of Pilate is in this. The symbolical washing of hands is indissolubly connected with the image of Pilate. The whole of him is in this gesture. For a man of real inner development there cannot be any washing of hands. This gesture of inner deceit can never belong to such a man. Pilate as a type expressing that which in cultured humanity hinders the inner development of man and forms the chief obstacle on the way to Superman. Life is full of big and small Pilates. The crucifixion of Christ can never be accomplished without their help. They see and understand the truth perfectly. But any regrettable necessity, or interests of politics as understood by them or interests of their own position, may force them to betray truth and then to wash their hands. In relation to the evolution of the spirit, Pilate is a stop. Real growth consists of the harmonious development of mind, feeling and will. A one-sided development, that is in this instance, the development of mind and will without the corresponding development of feeling, cannot go far. In order to betray truth Pilate had to make truth itself relative. This relativity of truth adopted by Pilate helps him to find a way out of difficult situations in which his own understanding of the truth places him. At the same time this very relativity of truth stops his inner development, the growth of his ideas. One cannot go far with relative truth. Pilate is bound to find himself in a closed circle and crystallize there. Another remarkable type in the gospel drama, a type also opposed to everything which in ordinary humanity leads to the Superman, is Judas. Judas is a very strange figure in the gospel tragedy. There is no one about whom so much has been written as Judas. In modern European literature there are attempts to represent and interpret Judas from all possible points of view. Contrary to the usual church interpretation of Judas as a mean and greedy Jew, who sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver, he is sometimes represented as a figure even higher than Christ. As a man who sacrificed himself, his salvation and his life eternal in order that the miracle of redemption should be accomplished. Or as a man who revolted against Christ, because Christ in his opinion spoilt the cause, surrounded himself with worthless people, put himself in a ridiculous position and so on. Judas, however, is not even a role, and certainly not a romantic hero, not a conspirator desirous of strengthening the union of the apostles with the blood of Christ, not a man struggling for the purity of the idea. Judas is simply a small man who found himself in the wrong place, an ordinary man full of distrust, of fears and suspicions, a man who ought not to have been amongst the apostles, who understood nothing of what Jesus said to his disciples. But a man who for some reason or other was accepted as one of them and was even given a responsible position and a certain authority. Judas was considered one of the favorite disciples of Jesus. He was in charge of the disciples' domestic arrangements, was their treasurer. The tragedy of Judas was that he feared to be exposed. He felt himself to be in the wrong place and dreaded the thought that Jesus might one day reveal this to others. At last, he could bear it no longer. He did not understand some words of Jesus. Perhaps he felt a threat in these words, perhaps a hint of something that only he and Jesus knew. Perturbed and frightened, Judas fled from the supper of Jesus and his disciples, then decided to expose Jesus. The famous 30 pieces of silver played no part in this whatsoever. Judas acted under the influence of injury and fear. He wished to break and destroy that which he did not comprehend, that which revolted and humiliated him by the very fact of its being above his understanding. He needed to accuse Jesus and his disciples of crimes in order to feel himself in the right. The psychology of Judas is a most human psychology, the psychology of slandering what one does not understand. The placing of Pilate side by side with Jesus is a wonderful feature of the gospel drama. It would be impossible to find or imagine a more striking contrast. If the Gospels were to be regarded simply as a literary work, as a work of art, then the placing together of Christ, Pilate and Judas would point to the hand of a great author. In short scenes, in a few words, there are shown here contradictions that not only have not disappeared in the human race in 2000 years, but have grown and developed with great luxuriance.